This is a 6th grade pre-AP Chapter 2 test review. All right, number 1 says change 21/4 into a mixed number. So we're just going to tie-bow it, top in, bottom out. So 4 going to 21 5 times. You have a remainder of 1, so that becomes your numerator. 5 is your whole number, and then you keep the same denominator, so 5 1/4. Number 2, change 6 4/5 into an improper fraction. So this, we can call it around the world or Texas. Basically, you're going to multiply 5 times 6, that's 30, and then add 4 to that. That's going to be 34, and again, you just keep the same denominator, so 34/5. Number 3, what is the least common denominator of 3/8 and 5/6? So we want to find the least common multiple of 8 and 6. So you can make a list. So the multiples of 8 are 8, 16, 24. Multiples of 6 are 6, 12, 18, and 24. And you just keep going until you find one that they have in common. And then the lowest one is their least common multiple. So the common denominator, 6 and 8, would be 24. Number 4, evaluate 1/4 plus -2/7. So evaluate just means solve. I'm going to find the common denominator first. So I need to find my multiples of 4 and 7. So the multiples of 4 are 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, and 28. And the multiples of 7 are 7, 14, 21, and 28. And my least common multiple is 28. So that means in order to change the 4 to a 28, I need to multiply it by 7. What I do to the bottom, I'm going to do to the top. And then I'm also going to need to change the 7 to 28. So if I multiply by 4, I'm going to get 28. So I'm also going to do that to the top, the numerator. So that gives me the new fraction 7 over 28 plus, and this is still negative, -8 over 28. All right, so once I have a common denominator, I can add or subtract them. So because the numerators are different signs, 7 plus -8, then I know that I need to find the difference because they're different. So that would give me 1, and then there are more negatives and positives, so I keep the sign of the most, so that would be -1, and then my denominator stays the same. And this cannot be simplified, so that's my answer, -1 28. -1 28. Number 5, 3 1/10 plus 2 3/4. So when I'm adding mixed numbers, then I'm going to start by making these improper because they're just easier to work with. So 10 times 3 would be 30. I'm multiplying and then I'm adding. And then adding the 1 would be 31 over 10. So I'm going to rewrite that as 31/10. I'm going to do the same thing with the 2 3/4. I'm going to multiply 4 times 2 is 8 and add the 3. That would be 11 over 4. I still need to find their common denominator, so I need to find the multiples of 10 and 4. The multiples of 10 are 10 and 20. The multiples of 4 are 4, 8, 12, 16, 20. So I can see that my common denominator is 20. It means I'm going to multiply the 10 by 2. So I'm going to multiply 31 by 2. I'm going to multiply the 4 by 5. So I'm going to multiply the 11 by 5 as well. That gives me the new fraction 62 over 20 plus 55 over 20. All right, so these are both positive, so this is just a normal addition problem. If I add 62 plus 55, I'm going to get 117. I keep the denominator as 20. But this is improper because the numerator is higher than the denominator, so I'm going to make this into a mixed number. So again, I'm going to use tie-bow, top in, bottom out. I'm going to divide 20 into 117. 20 will go into 117 5 times. 5 times 20 is 100, so when I subtract, I have a remainder of 17. I'm going to use that to make my mixed number. My whole number is 5. My remainder becomes my numerator, and my denominator stays the same. So 5 and 17 20ths. All right. Number 6, I'm subtracting mixed numbers. So again, I want to start by making them improper. 8 times 5 is 40, plus 1 is 41 over 8. Do the same thing to the 1 2/3. 3 times 1 is 3, plus 2 is 5. I'm going to keep the denominator 5/3. Now I want to find their common denominator because I need to do that anytime I'm adding or subtracting fractions. I'm going to find the multiples of 8, 8, 16, 24. The multiples of 3, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 24. So 24 is my common denominator. I'm going to be multiplying 8 times 3 to make it 24. So I'm also going to multiply 41 times 3. I need to multiply 3 times 8. So I'll do that to the top as well. This becomes 123 over 24. 5 times 8 is 40 over 24. So now I can subtract. And because 123 is more than 40, this is just a regular subtraction problem. There's not anything funny with the negatives. So I can just subtract 123 minus 40. So that would be 83. I'm going to keep the denominator 24. And then because that's improper, I'm going to need to divide, typo. I'm going to divide 24 into 83. So it will go, let's see, 3 times. It'll be 72. And then when I subtract, I get 11. So my mixed number is going to have a whole number of 3. A numerator will be 11, and my denominator will stay 24. And that does not simplify, so this is my answer, 3 and 11 24ths. In number 7, I'm multiplying 2 decimals. So I always put the one with the most digits on the top. So that would be 31.2. And then I'm going to multiply it times 0.6. I don't actually have to have that first 0. That's just kind of a placeholder. So I just need the 0.6. And in this case, the decimals are going to line up. But remember, I don't always have to line up my decimals because I'm going to ignore my decimals into the very end. So now I'm just going to multiply like I normally would. 6 times 2 is 12. Carry the 1. 6 times 1 is 6, plus 1 is 7. 6 times 3 is 18. And then at the end, I go back and I count how many decimal places should be in my answer. So there's 1 decimal place here, another one here, so that would be 2. So I need 2 in my answer, so that's going to put my decimal between 8 and 7. So my answer should be 18.72. Okay. Number 8, name at least 3 decimal expressions that have a product of 0.36. So I'm trying to find numbers that multiply, because that's what product means, to give me 0.36. Well, I know if I want to multiply 2 numbers to get just a regular 36, I could use 4 times 9. Okay, but that gives me a whole number of 36. If I want it to have 2 decimal places, then the numbers I multiply need to have a total of 2 decimal places. So I could do 0.4 times 0.9, because then I would need 2 decimal places. That would give me 36, right? Move it over 2 places, 0.36. And so there are lots of different ways to get this. I know that 12 times 3 also gives me 36. So if I want to make it 0.36, then I just need to make sure I have 2 decimals in my product. So I could put or in my factors. So I could make it 0.12. So that would be 2 decimals here, so I would have 2 in my answer. Or I could make it 1.2 and then multiply it times 0.3, and that would be 0.36, because I have 1 decimal here and 1 decimal here, so that would make 2. I could do, let's see, I could do 0.36 times 1. That would be 0.36. I could do 0.6, right? Times 6 times 6 is 36, so 0.6 times 0.6 would be 0.36. So anyway, there's lots of different ones you can use. This is not a complete list, so you can keep going. If you think of others, use them. Number 9. On these, 9, 10, and 11, we're multiplying and writing in simplest form. It asks, does the first factor increase or decrease, and to explain. All right, so I'm going to start with these 2 fractions here, 4/5 times negative 2/3. Multiplying fractions, ain't no problem. Top times the top, bottom times the bottom. So all I need to do is multiply. Because I'm multiplying a positive times a negative, I can use sleeping man with this. So I know that a negative times a positive gives me a negative. So I know 4 times negative 2 is going to be negative 8. And then 5 times 3 is 15. That does not simplify, so this is my answer. All right, so did the first factor increase or decrease? So the first factor was 4/5. Now it's negative 8 and 4/15. So it definitely decreased because it was positive, and now it's negative. And let's see, why did that happen? Because I multiplied by a negative, basically, a positive times a negative. Now, if this were positive, it would still decrease, because anytime I multiply by a number less than 1, that's going to cause the value of the first factor to decrease. So we could say decrease because negative 2/3 is less than 1. Okay, you could also say it's less than 0, so that makes it negative. Or you could say because it's negative, it decreases. Lots of reasons. Just explain why you think this went from 4/5 to negative 8/15. Okay, number 10. This time I'm doing a negative times a negative. So again, if I have a negative and a negative, my answer is going to be positive. So I know negative 5 times negative 2, positive 10. 7 times 5 is 35. And then this time I can simplify. So these are both divisible by 5. That becomes 2/7. All right, I started with a negative 5/7 and it changed to a positive 2/7. So did this factor increase or decrease? Well, it went from a negative to a positive, so it definitely increased. And I could say multiplying by a negative made negative 5/7 positive. Okay, number 11, I am still multiplying, but this time I have a whole number and a mixed number. So before I multiply these, I want to change them both to fractions. So my 4, to make it a fraction, that whole number, I'm going to write it as 4/1. To make 2.5 into an improper fraction, I'm going to multiply 2 times 2 is 4, and add the 1, that would be 5/2. Okay, and then I can do top times the top, so that would be 20, bottom times the bottom is 2. And then I want to simplify that. So this is, again, just another way to write division. So I know 20 divided by 2 is 10, so my answer is 10. And then if I compare the first factor, 4, to my answer, 10, 4 definitely increased. And it increased because I multiplied by a number that was greater than 1. So I multiplied by 2.5, that's definitely more than 1. So I could say 2.5 is greater than 1. All right. If we continue, I'm dividing in this case. Writing in simplest form is if necessary. So dividing fractions, ain't no lie. Flip the second one and multiply, or you may have learned this as keep, change, flip. Either one will work. I need to start though by making this negative 4 into a fraction, so negative 4/1. So I'm going to keep that. I'm going to change to multiply, and I'm going to flip that second fraction to the reciprocal, which means I just turn it over. Then I'm multiplying negative 4 times 5. A negative times a positive is negative. 2 times 1 is 2. And then again, this is just division. So 20 divided by 2 is 10, and it stays negative because a negative divided by a positive is negative 10. All right, on 13, I'm going to change these mixed numbers both to improper before I try to divide. So 3 times 3 is 9, add the 1, that would be 10. 8 times 1 is 8, plus 7 is 15/8. Okay, I still need to do the keep, change, flip, so 10/3 times 8/15. And then when I multiply, 10 times 8 is 80, 3 times 15 is 45. Right, this is improper, so I want to go ahead and divide it. So top in, bottom out. 45 will go into 80 one time. I'm going to get a remainder of 35. So I'm going to use that to make my numerator 35/45. But this can still be simplified, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. These are both divisible by 5. So I'm going to end up with 1 and 7/9. 1 and 7/9. For 14, I'm dividing decimals. All right, so I know first in, last out. So that tells me the 2.9 will be out. And the first n is 51.62. And then remember, when you're dividing by a decimal, you don't want, you can't really divide by a decimal, so you need to make this a whole number. So we call this the fox and the rabbit. So I'm going to move it one time. The fox moves over once till it hits this wall. So the rabbit moves over once as well. So now I'm actually dividing 29 into 516.2. All right, so I know that 29 will go into 51 one time. When I subtract, I'm going to get 22. I'm going to bring down that 6. 29 will go into 226. Let's see, how many times? 7 times. So 7 times 9 is 63. Carry your 6. 7 times 2 is, if I do it over here, 29 times 7. 63. Carry your 6 is 203. All right, so that becomes 23. And then I'm going to bring down the 2. I bring up the decimal. That's the rabbit. Hops up. So 29 will go into 232. If I try 8 times. 2, 7, 16 plus 7 is 23. All right, so 8 times. My final answer is 17.8. 15. Nails cost 13 cents a pound. Screws cost 21 cents per pound. Michelle bought 1.5 pounds of nails and 3.4 pounds of screws. How much did she pay for the nails and the screws? Round to the nearest cent. So if the cost for nails is 13 cents and I buy 1.5 pounds of nails, if I need to know how much I paid for my nails, I'm going to multiply these two numbers. So 1.5 times 0.13. Again, I don't need to line up my decimal, and it doesn't really matter which one I put on top because they both have the same number of digits. So 3 times 5 is 15. Carry your 1. 3 times 1 is 3 plus 1 is 4. Start with a 0. 1 times 5 is 5. 1 times 1 is 1. I'm going to add these up. 5, 9, 1. There are 1, 2, 3 decimal places. So 1, 2, 3. My decimal goes in front of the 1. For the screws, they cost 21 cents per pound, and I bought 3.4 pounds of them. So if I multiply 3.4 times 21, 1 times 4 is 4. 1 times 3 is 3. Start with a 0. 2 times 4 is 8. 2 times 3 is 6. Add these up. And you're going to get 714. There's 1, 2, 3 decimal places, so that's going to put it in front of the 7. And then I want the total that I paid. So this is the cost of the nails plus the screws. So I'm going to line up my decimal to find the total. That's going to give me 9, 10, 8, 9. Bring down my decimal, so 0.909. And it tells me to round to the nearest cent. So this is like 90 cents, but I don't have 909 cents. I need to round. So if I look at if I want to round to the nearest hundredth, then I have to look at the number next to it in the thousands place. So since this 9 is more than 5 or 5 or more, that's going to round the 90 to a 91. And that's how much I paid, 91 cents. All right, on 16, it says Monday, the high temperature in Austin was 57.2 degrees Fahrenheit, and the high temperature in Chicago was 26 degrees Fahrenheit. How many times greater was the high temperature in Austin than the high temperature in Chicago on Monday? And then they have a hint, 26 times blank equals 57.2. So the question is 26 times what number would give me 57.2? So I can't multiply. It's obviously not 26 times 57. That's not what they're telling me. I know it's 26 times something equals 57.2. So what I have to do is the opposite. Instead of multiplying, I'm going to divide to solve this. So I'm going to divide 26 into 57.2. Now 26 doesn't have a decimal, so there's nothing to move over. I'm just going to divide. 26 will go into 57 2 times. So 2 times 6 is 12. Carry your 1. 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5. When I subtract, I get 5. I'm going to bring up this decimal and bring down the 2, and then 26 will go into 52 2 more times. And so I can stop. All right, so what this means is 26 times 2.2 is equal to 57.2. All right, 17, a mother tiger is 11 times longer than a tiger cub. How long is the mother tiger if the tiger cub is 1.28 feet long? So this time, 11 times longer than the cub means I'm multiplying 11 times the cub. And I know that the cub is 1.28. So I'm actually going to multiply this time. 1.28 times 11. I'm putting the 1.28 on top because there are more digits. 1 times 8, 1 times 2, and 1 times 1. Start with a 0. 1 times 8, 1 times 2, 1 times 1. When I add these up, I get 1408. There are 1, 2 decimals, so 1, 2 decimals It puts the decimal between 4 and 0. So this means my tiger is 14.08 feet long. Okay. And 18, it says Miss Farrar is building a rectangular patio that is 7.25 feet long and 7 2/5 feet long and 9 2/7 feet wide. What is the area of her patio? So if I'm finding the area of a rectangle, then I know I'm going to multiply the length times the width. So that means I'm going to multiply 7 2/5 times 9 2/7. I'm multiplying fractions, so they need to both be improper before I can do that. 5 times 7 is 35, plus 2 is 37 over 5. 7 times 9 is 63, plus 2 is 65 over 7. All right, so I could go ahead and multiply 37 times 65 and 5 times 7 and get 35. And that would work. But the shortcut is to cross simplify or cross reduce. So I can see that 5 and 65 would both be divisible by 5. So if I divide both of these by 5, then that's going to give me 37 over 1 now. 65, if I divide by 5, is 13. That gives me 13 over 7. All right, so that's a little better. 13 times 37, so that's what I'm going to use. 37 times 13. We get 21, 3 times 3 is 9, plus 2 is 11. Start with a 0, 1 times 7, 1 times 3. Gives me 481. And 1 times 7 is 7. So I still have to make this into a mixed number. So I'm going to divide 7 into 481. It'll go 6 times. 6 times 7 is 42. Bring down the 1. 7 will go into 61. 8 times would be 56. So that would be 5. All right, so that gives me 68 as a whole number, 5 as a numerator, and my denominator is 7. So 68 and 5/7. Now, if you didn't cross reduce like I did here, if you just did it regular, 37 over 5 times 65 over 7. And what you would end up with when you multiply these two numbers should be, where is it? You would get 2,405. 5 times 7 is 35. So then you would still divide 35 into 2,405. It's a little harder, but you're going to get the same answer. It's still going to be 6 times 30 would be 210, and then you're going to bring down the 5, and 35 will go into 305 8 times. 40, 24, 28. All right, so when you subtract, you're going to get 25. So that's going to give you 68 and 25 over 35, which can still be simplified by 5. So this ends up being 68 and 5/7. Okay, which is the same thing I got over here. So you can choose either way. Cross-reducing just saves you a little work. Okay? All right, and I'm going to stop the review here because it's getting kind of long. And so part 2 will start with number 19.